You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. My guest today has been on the podcast before, Peter Ambrose, the CEO of the partnership. Last time we spoke about technology and the role that it had in changing the conveyancing process. This time we're focusing quite succinctly on Enquiries. You're a firm at the coalface of conveyancing. You're saying you do around 200 to 300 completions a month. And as a result, you're seeing this issue, shall we say, with Enquiries raise its head quite regularly. We're going to have a chat around that particular problem. We're also going to talk about a solution that you're developing internally in the business. But in the first instance, I know you don't need a huge amount of introduction, Peter, but a very brief introduction would be helpful, please.
Well, fantastic to join you today, David. As ever, great fun. What do we do? I run the partnership. We're a law firm based in London and Guildford. The idea for setting up the business was we wanted to make it service first. We wanted technology to be underpinning everything that we did. We managed to grow the business very successfully. We only do residential conveyancing. We mainly focus London and the southeast. So we've got a special type of client. And we've always said that technology must underpin brilliant lawyers. So we have about 25 lawyers that work in-house, and we employ everybody. We don't use a consultancy model or anything like that. And every lawyer is one-to-one with a legal assistant, and everyone is full-time. So we think we know what it takes to deliver good service, but it's a constant challenge. And we're always looking at ways to improve. And what we've started to do in the last couple of years is look at how we can improve working with other law firms. And that's really been the change of our business. And that's what we see going forward, is how we improve overall the working of the whole conveyancing process.
So quite specifically, we're going to talk about Enquiries, as we've said, and you have created something internally, Legalito, as long as I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, absolutely. Legalito. We called it Legalito because obviously it's legal IT, and I'm learning Italian, and I think Italy's really cool. So it's Legalito because it's masculine singular, just in case.
Fine. Well, so we know the background of what the name is. What is Legalito, Peter?
Legalito is a totally separate company. What we did was we decided that we looked at what were the key issues that we addressed with our technology internally, and we wanted to share these with other law firms. The reason why this came up was that every time a lawyer joined us, they looked at our system and thought, this is amazing. I couldn't do without this. And there were certain areas that they found particularly important. The one which we see as the key area is that of inquiry management. And I use the word management very carefully there, because what we're not doing and we're not saying is, oh, artificial intelligence or technology needs to come along and raise inquiries, because we are not 100% convinced that that is the right thing or the right problem to solve. However, what we do know is that the sheer pain that is managing inquiries goes to the heart of the conveyancing process. And if we can share some of our technology with other people, then we can see that only benefiting everyone. So that's why it is a brand new company, totally separate from the law firm, but taking our experience and our expertise in dealing with these issues.
That's a useful introduction. Thank you. I really want to kind of explore what your experience of Enquiries is, and you've been in business for a number of years. And I mean, I assume, rightly or wrongly, that this has become it's obviously a big issue at the moment. You see it all over social and LinkedIn, but it is a bigger issue now than it ever was.
It's definitely getting worse. And what we see, we did some studies around the volumes of inquiries, because we've always tracked inquiries electronically. We always know the statistics. So, for example, I know there was an article a few months ago on Today's Conveyancer. We've seen an increase this year of 35% of the number of inquiries that we're receiving. Okay,
this year alone?
Per case. Yeah, this year it's gone up by 35%. It's crazy. And people talking about it anecdotally, we've got the data on this, and it's really problematic. And we have to do something about it. That we can no longer say, oh, well, things are getting worse, we just need to improve the process, or we need to change the process. We can't sit by now. And When I look at the time that my lawyers spend on certain elements, inquiries is the number one thing, and it's getting worse, and there's no solution in sight to improving this in terms of the sheer numbers that are being asked. It's really obvious why more inquiries are being asked. There is an element of training, a huge element. There is an element of risk, and there is an element of lack of understanding of where that risk sits. So without doubt, those people that are saying, oh, we're seeing an increase in poor quality inquiries, yes, they're right. No denying it.
Let's drill into that then. What do you mean by where the risk sits?
When we had the idea for Legalito, the first thing we did was we went to our insurers and we said, where are all the claims coming from? And they said the number one area of claim is where lawyers are not raising inquiries that their clients ask. It's the number one thing, not passing on inquiries. And we've seen this firsthand in my firm. And it's a huge, huge problem. In other words, client asks a question, we either forget to answer it or we don't get the answer to the satisfaction of the client. So that's the number one area of claim. The second area of claim that we were told was lawyers not asking the right inquiries in the first place. And if you ever want to understand where risk sits within the conveyancing process, and I'm sure everyone here who's listening to this who knows about conveyancing will agree with this, is whenever you get a claim, and they're fact of life, we can't deny it, whenever we get a claim, the first thing you look at when you've purchased and when you bought something is what inquiries do you raise. And the problem is, of course, is that because of the opaque way in which most law firms work, trying to understand what inquiries were raised and the answers they got is really difficult. And this is where the claims are. It's really simple, you know. And so we said you have to bring transparency to it. Whenever we get a situation like that, the first thing we do is pull up our inquiry report and say, what were the questions we asked and what were the answers that we got? And when you talk to lawyers that join us, they tell us that there's no way they could have done that in their other firms. There's just no way. And that's when we're talking about risk.
And this is because inquiries are raised by email predominantly.
It is by email, and just not in a very structured way. Now, what we're not saying is you need computers to raise inquiries. Got to be really clear about that. I'm not saying that for a second. But what I am saying is that if you raise 10 inquiries and you get 5 answers back, 3 of which are to follow and the other 2 is we're going to seek clients' instructions, you've got to make darn sure that you check all those. And the way that it works is typically, and what we're finding is when we're talking to other law firms, is they will send an email to the other side and say, right, could you respond to this? And then when you ask lawyers how they're going to track that, they say, oh, well, it's almost like a traveling draft almost. Yeah, they'll get a response back and they'll put the answers under one underneath. Now, they know, everybody knows that's not a good way of doing it. But it's better than nothing because they don't have the tools with which to do it otherwise. The flip side of that, sometimes people will say to us, they'll send us like a Word document with a form in it. And they'll say, can you reply within that form? And even though they say, oh, this is a good way of doing it, in their heart of hearts, they know that it isn't, because when you get reply and then sub-inquiry reply and so forth, tracking that is really difficult. And so, yes, you have a document that's a traveling draft as an attachment. But again, trying to be really clear and understanding where the gaps are in those inquiries is really tough because Word's unstructured. And that's why you get these crazy situations with repeated numbering, weird lettering for things, the use or otherwise of sub-inquiries that people don't do and they should do. So all this sort of stuff. It's really difficult to do it within an unstructured document like Word.
So are we saying here that we need to have a level of mandation or prescription in the questions? You said that technology isn't going to ask the questions. We still need to use our brains. But how do we marry the two up?
I'll be controversial now, because one of the most common bits of negative feedback we get when we're talking to people, and we've been talking to people about Legalito for a couple of months now. We've been quite quiet, but we are now going out and talking to people now because we wanted to, is they will say, oh, what you're doing is you're dumbing down inquiry raising. And you'll end up with a template of 50 questions that you will raise always of the other side. And that's terrible. And you shouldn't do that. It's not a good approach. We fundamentally disagree with this, because what happens is when you talk to experienced lawyers, they say, I start with a clean sheet of paper and I raise the inquiries pertinent to that property only. And that's fine. And that's correct. However, if people are really honest with one another, they would say, yeah, but fundamentally, I do raise the same inquiries. I just like to do it from scratch. And that's risky because you'll probably forget to raise the one that you meant to. And on the other side of the coin, you're probably always raising the same sorts of inquiries. So there's no reason why you shouldn't template those, but just use them appropriately. But there is an air of, oh, I've got to, it's undermining my expertise. Well, it's not that at all. What we're saying is, by all means, start with a clean sheet, but please template the questions that you use most frequently, which is how we've always done it as a firm. We've been doing this for 10 years, where we've given people a list of inquiries to use. They don't have to use it, and they can change them or whatever, but at least it gives them a starting point. And there is this misunderstanding that says, oh, technology's going to be used by people who don't know what they're talking about. Well, we can't solve that problem. We can't stop inexperienced lawyers raising inquiries. But what we can do is we can make the lives of more experienced lawyers easier, but also enable them to be able to share that information more easily with those less experienced lawyers and give them the training that they need. Because this is the big problem, is that experienced lawyers don't have enough time to train inexperienced lawyers and then sit around and complain that they're not being trained. But we have to make more time, and we have to make it more trackable so that the lawyers can go, look, here's an example. And I'd say to your listeners, when was there ever an occasion where you could say to a junior lawyer, here's the list of inquiries that I raised, and here's the answers that I got from them, and this is why this is acceptable, and that's not acceptable in an answer. It's really difficult for lawyers to do that if they're using email backwards and forth, because it's not in a structured way that people can then look at, can read, and you can understand where the gaps are. And this is what we're talking about. I'm not talking about artificially intelligently raising inquiries. I'm talking about tracking those inquiries that you as experienced lawyers can then make sure you've got the right questions and the right answers.
I'm going to throw something controversial back at you, Peter. We already have a list. It's there in the conveyancing protocol, isn't it?
Well, that is a really, really good point. And there is an argument that says, why aren't we all using the same inquiries? I personally think what would be great, I had this idea for Legalito, which I would have a central bank of inquiries that would basically, the more it was used, the more people would see what the right inquiries were used and to share them as a central one. You're absolutely right. But the problem you hit is people will say, well, there's 100 of them or whatever. What do I pick? And what we're saying is we get that. You can make it smarter. So if you profile a property and you say, well, look, it's a leasehold, I'm getting a mortgage and so forth. If you profile it, you could make suggestions. So one of the things we offer is you can make suggestions on that, but you can't make it prescriptive. And as I say, the challenge is, and it is controversial, if you say to an experienced lawyer, oh, you should use the standard inquiries, they'll say, but I'm not a standard lawyer.
Let's drill into the types of inquiries that get raised. I was on LinkedIn a little while ago, and Conveyancer had posted that they'd been asked about the paint colour because they wanted to match up the paints. Surely some of this is part of the material information piece that's happening at the moment around getting more information up front to make a better informed decision, so that potentially we're not raising as many inquiries further down the line.
I think it's interesting how you threw in there that you said in terms of we get the information up front and make an informed decision. For me, information up front is not about informed decisions. I think what it is, and I think that's actually a bit of a missell, which I know is very popular at the moment, to say, well, it is a silver bullet, but it's not a silver bullet, but we think it is a silver bullet. Upfront information, for me, goes a long way to reducing the gaps in our knowledge. And this is what we're doing. I think what people forget is what inquiries are for is they're to what I call do the gap analysis, in terms of this is the information we've got and this is the information we need. If we could reduce the number of gaps, absolutely 100%. I think the big challenge for upfront information is, what do people do with it? And can I rely on it? What's the provenance of it? And I think upfront information is key, but it's almost, to me, it's like a no-brainer. I'm a bit like, that's great and all that. Let's get this upfront information, whatever that is, because we get loads of upfront information, whether it's from the property forms or the management companies. There is this feeling that somehow conveyancers are going into this blind. Yeah. Oh, we've got this house. We don't know anything about it at all. Let's just make it all up. It's like, well, no, that's not true at all. You've got the protocol forms. You've got the type. You've got a lot of information. Yes, there are gaps in it. So I think, yes, I mean, in an ideal world, we wouldn't ask any inquiries. The only reason we ask inquiries is because we sit there and we've got, for example, we might have a lender. Yeah. Or we might have a particularly difficult client. Everybody seems to forget about the clients. They're sitting there going, well, actually, I have these concerns. Everyone goes, no, upfront information. Well, in the nice possible way, because we represent the clients, because we represent the lenders, we're sitting there going, that's great and all that, but my client might have a really weird requirement. Say, for example, I had one the other day. Does the postman walk past the front door to deliver the mail? Niche inquiry. Is it appropriate for a property? And you could sit there going, well, no, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to answer that because it's not about the title. Okay. However, the client was insistent. I don't know why. Maybe they had an issue with a dog. But whatever it is, the situation is when the clients ask the questions, we cannot ignore it. Remember, going back to my point earlier, where do the claims come from? It's where clients are asking these questions, and we as lawyers have to say to the other side, look, I'm really sorry. I know this sounds ridiculous, but our clients asked this. And we forget this a lot, I think. You know, when you talk about paint color, it would have been the client. I can't see, well, I'm going to say that. I can't see a lawyer of their own volition going, you know what I'm going to ask about? I'm going to ask about paint color. But if their clients asked it, if they don't answer it, and I think it's really easy for people to forget that, and quite frustrating. Yeah.
To me, that feels like an ownership issue, though. This isn't, as you say, it's not part of the title. It's not part of the legal transfer of the property. So therefore, this shouldn't really land at the lap of the conveyancer.
It shouldn't. But answer me this then. Okay. Who else is going to answer that question in a way that can be relied upon? This is the challenge. So, for example, if I go to the estate agent, if I'm buying a house and I say, oh, when were the windows installed? Because I think they're rotten. And the agent says, no, don't you worry about that. They were installed 5 years ago and they're guaranteed. You go, great. Then, of course, you move in. And, of course, they're not guaranteed at all and they were 20 years ago. Then if you don't ask your lawyer, who else are you going to ask? You can't rely, you can't. I mean, you could try going after the agent. We've seen people try and do that. It generally fails. And so it's totally understandable that if people are saying, I have concerns about this property, that they go through their lawyer. And also, let's not forget, how many times as lawyers do we say to people, you must communicate through your lawyer? We had someone the other day, I mean, it got quite a stir on LinkedIn where someone from the other side called us directly. Now, it was a little bit odd because it was the partner of someone that was buying, and they actually called up pretending to be a solicitor to want to exchange, which was a little bit unusual. But that in itself, we said, no, you need to talk to your lawyer. So I think we have to be really careful and say, on the one hand, we're saying to people that you must go through the lawyer for perfectly reasonable reasons. Yeah, how can I rely on it and so forth? We can't then complain, oh, we're getting these ridiculous inquiries. It's a tricky one.
So you're not an advocate of pushing back on some of these ridiculous and inverted inquiries?
Absolutely, and we would always do that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you've, it's like, for example, people say to us, we think they might be building an extension next door. Is a classic question. Yeah, okay. Can you check this out? And we always say, tell you what to do. Nip down the planning portal, have a look yourself. That's our standard answer. Why do we do that? For the obvious reasons. If we say no, no, in our opinion, there's no, from our research, there's no planning next door. Guy moves in 3 months later, neighbour pops round and says, oh, by the way, I'm building an extension. We know that client's going to come back after us. And that's why there are certain things we go, actually, you know what? We don't want to be on the hook for that because it's something that we have no accurate information about, like your paint colour or, flavour of the month, height of the building. Mm-hmm. We're getting more and more people saying, oh, is it over 5 meters, whatever, and so forth, all this usual BSA stuff. And we're sitting there going, well, we're not surveyors. And we're getting this. We are getting this stuff. And I think the problem is that it then becomes a blame game. And everyone goes, oh, that's the sort of lawyer that asks ridiculous questions. You say, well, it's a really difficult one because on the one hand, you want to be helpful. On the other hand, you need to protect yourself. It's not like everything in this stuff. It's never simple, and there's never a simple answer. And it's not about good lawyers versus bad lawyers. So I do get frustrated when you see these chatter. We're a great advocate of Rob's Bold Legal Group. Yeah, great. Some of the discussions I see on that are very blamey and very fingery pointery. And it's like it's not as simple as that, because if a client asks you a question, you ignore it at your peril, or you don't deal with it at your peril, should I say.
You said before about the reliability of information, and I think that's a critical part of this, isn't it? Being able to rely upon something, as you say, particularly with BSA is a great example. You're not surveyors. And we've had the same argument with searches. You're not flood specialists, you're not geologists, you're not Part 2A contaminated land specialists either. It's such a difficult mishmash of things. Everything just lands on the conveyancer's desk.
It is. I mean, we could all bleat how unfair life is, and there are a few people that do, which is their prerogative. This is the reality of conveyancing in 2023. And I think what we need to do is we need to look at this, not say things like unhelpful things like it's broken or other law firms need to be better. I think what we have to do is we have to say, right, we have to look at this from a risk perspective and go, right, what can we do to minimize the risk of what we're doing in terms of the advice we're giving and deal with it. And I think some of the solutions or some of the ideas that people are coming up with, like, oh, we're not going to handle properties that fall foul of the BSA. That's okay, except that you run the risk of then the situation where you've got maybe existing clients, happy clients, that you're then saying, no, I'm sorry, I can't act for you. And I get it. And I spoke to someone the other day. They said, we're not doing this. I said, why not? They said, frankly, we can't be bothered with the risk. And I get that. And that's fine. We take a very pragmatic approach to these sorts of issues. And we don't do risk. But on the other hand, you have to sort of say, that goes with the territory. How do I minimize my risk? But conveyancing today, I think, is still technical. It is still problematic. But I think that lawyers have to find ways to almost ring fence what they're doing. And that really does manifest itself, to come back to the topic of inquiries, is what questions am I raising? Conversely, how am I dealing with these difficult questions where people are asking questions that we shouldn't answer? Should you say, this is not to do with the title, I'm not going to answer this question? Which is sort of okay, but sort of isn't, because then what happens is, of course, the other side say, well, you're not answering my questions, and therefore an impasse. And that in itself then doesn't help anybody, because all it does is slow things up. I'm not saying it's easy, but as someone who does 60% leasehold work, it's really difficult. But we have to find ways to deal with it, and that's what I say to my lawyers. We have to find ways to overcome this. We cannot sit around and go, oh, this is just awful and it's unfair and it's wrong and we shouldn't do this. Which, interestingly, with my legalito hat on, when I'm talking to law firms, and I was talking to a lot at the moment now, and it's brilliant, the feedback is fantastic, because what the partners and the owners of law firms are going, we have to know how to deal with this stuff. Mm-hmm. There is real recognition. There is this feeling I get that people say, people stick their heads in the sands. They don't want to change because of vested interests. Have you seen this? Vested interests. What vested interest in not having deals go through? I don't think so. But there is genuine appetite for change. The challenge people have got is that people haven't been offering them solutions that actually make their life easier. But there really is, and anyone listening to this, please keep the faith. There is change coming, but it's not from where you think it's coming from. That's all I'll say. It's not from the, don't worry, we've got material information that's going to make our lives better. It's not coming from that. That's like yeah, nice. Because it really isn't going to be the impact. And any lawyer you speak to, if you say material information, it's a bit like, yeah, that's great.
It's almost like mentioning the word hip, isn't it?
Yeah.
I guess the point here, and this is something we haven't really sort of drilled into in the discussion, is it's all about evidence, isn't it? It's you've talked about your PI, you've talked about the way conveyancing is going, you've talked about managing risk, regardless of whether it's legalito or however you manage your inquiries. It's about demonstrating that you've got the evidence. So if anybody ever comes knocking, you can say, this is how we dealt with it.
You've hit the nail on the head. And I think this is where it does become tricky. You talk about provenance of data, and then you look around and you say, well, where am I going to get that data from? There is this sort of feeling that you've got a few people that could deliver this information, one of which, for example, is land registry, which is absolutely true. And our view is very much like, gosh, if everything was in one place, that would be fantastic, but it never is. The problem that we find, for example, when you're looking at leasehold, is that, which is where we get most of our issues, no two ways about it.
Yeah.
Where is that information coming from? Management companies, service companies, and so forth. Information is patchy at best, and they would be the first to admit it. And for us, as long as we can say, we can show that we took reasonable steps, that this was accurate information, then we're happy. But I'll give you an example. A few months ago, we had a situation where we were buying a flat and we were pretty sure there was a cladding issue on there. We weren't certain, but we were pretty sure. And we asked for the management pack, and we got it through from the agent said, look, don't worry, here's the management pack. And we looked at it, and we thought, and there was a big blank space in it. That's a bit odd, isn't it? A big block that was knocked out. And then when we said, and he said, well, you can rely on that. And I'm like, well, that's very interesting. And then we got the original, we got the proper management pack from the other side. And that paragraph that was blocked out was about a lack of EWS1 form.
Right.
So you sit there going, so I've got a pack that appears to come from the management company, but clearly there was some really important data that had been missed out. And that's the problem. So we said, no, we must rely. What we were concerned about was where did it come from? And there again, that was proof, if it was needed, that actually, even though the source of the data was the management company, it had to come to us direct so that we could rely on it. And I think provenance is really important, but even that still bites you. We had a situation a few years ago where we were relying on information from the seller that turned out to be false, but we relied on it, and unfortunately we weren't able to rely on it. And that was really, really tough. That was a tough lesson for us. And what happened was that because it went to the insurers said, okay, well, there's no blame here, but we're going to settle. And that was really difficult. It was really difficult for us because we were like, we relied on the seller's information. So I think we have to be a little bit careful on that. It was a big claim, and very unfair. But again, we could sit around and bleat, but we looked at it and we went, right, well, going forward, we're going to make sure we explicitly put this in the contract. We're not going to rely on documentation. And you just have to learn to adjust. But that was a really interesting case whereby we relied on what was clearly, well, we didn't know at the time, but was false information.
We're fast moving to the end of the discussion. We've gone round the houses, excuse the pun, Peter. But I know that you are very, very passionate about the role that technology has got to play in the success of conveyancing. And it's not a case of technology is going to take over conveyancing. I hope we've got past this idea that conveyancers are worried that AI is going to take our jobs and all that kind of thing. And I think, in the discussion we've said, this is about good lawyers making good decisions backed by good technology. But it's really important that we don't just discard that technology discussion, isn't it?
I think it's critical. I think it's critical for the future of the business. There is this danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Whilst we know that there are some pretty dreadful systems out there, out of date, that don't offer a lot of value to lawyers, I think by dismissing technology as not having a part to play to support really good lawyers making really good informed decisions, I think we're putting the reduction of risk back years and years and years. And what firms need to do is they need to say what technology is available to us and what can we do better. Because I always say to my guys, humans are really good at interacting and at looking at wider problems, but they're really bad at remembering things like tasks and to do stuff. Computers are really good at remembering that sort of thing, and we should use them for that part of it. Now, should we be using computers to make decisions for us? Probably not. I think that's a step too far. To be able to look at a document and go, oh, I know what questions I should raise. I think any law firm owner that says to themselves, that's a great idea, I should do that, I think they'd be few and far between. But if we insist on continuing this idea that, technology is bad and I just need better lawyers, we're not going to go forward, and we're not going to solve the issues that we see today of making our really good lawyers even better and reducing the risk around what they do.
I suspect that the PI insurer's got a view on that as well. Go ask your PI insurer whether a paper file versus an electronic file, and see which one they take their pick.
100%. When I was starting up Legalito, I went to see the insurers, and they were just blown away. They said, oh my God, this is what we have to do. And it's not because Legalito is a brilliant solution or anything like that. But what they're saying is, we know that technology is the right solution for reducing risk. So we need lawyers to be doing this. And they were without a shadow of a doubt. They said, what was interesting was they said to me, oh, could we force it that only certain answers could be given to questions? Which was a step too far. I thought it was a step too far. And I said, well, no, you can't really do that. But that's what they wanted. And they absolutely see this as a huge thing. And interestingly, we always invite our insurers over to see us once every couple of years, and we show them the technology that we're using, and they, without doubt, that this contributes to our the way that we're profiled for the insurance. And people need to look at how they're using technology to reduce the risk, and from the insurance point of view, because it's without, as I say, without question, I can't stress this enough. They absolutely do look at how we raise inquiries, how we monitor them, how we track them, our task lists, our reporting. Yeah, 100%.
There's a parallel here with the safe harbour scheme, HMLR safe harbour scheme, and an ID, isn't there? You know, that you'll be indemnified if you use an approved product.
100%.
It's been great to chat, Peter. We've reached the end of the time that we've got. We could probably talk about this for the rest of the day, but it's been fantastic to have you on the podcast. Thank you very much indeed for joining.
Absolute pleasure. As a lovely talking to you.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. My thanks to Peter. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.